The branches clawed at Emma's jacket as she stumbled deeper into the Oregon wilderness, her phone's flashlight beam cutting through the thick darkness like a desperate plea. 3 hours had passed since she'd taken that wrong turn on the hiking trail, and now the towering Douglas firs seemed to close in around her like prison walls. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed her back against a massive tree trunk, trying to catch her breath. The silence was deafening. No cars, no voices, no civilization. Just the whisper of wind through ancient branches and the distant call of something wild that made her blood run cold. "Think, Emma, think," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible in the vast emptiness. She was a marketing coordinator from Portland, not some wilderness survival expert. Her biggest outdoor challenge until today had been finding parking at the farmer's market. She pulled out her phone again, desperate for even a single bar of signal. Nothing. The screen showed 23% battery, another countdown to disaster. Her hands trembled as she opened her GPS app, but the map showed nothing but green wilderness stretching in every direction. No trails, no roads, no way home. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness behind her. Emma froze, every muscle in her body tensing. She slowly turned her head, the flashlight beam sweeping across the forest floor. Nothing but shadows and fallen leaves. But she could feel it, something watching her. The kind of primal awareness that had kept her ancestors alive when the world was still wild and dangerous. Another sound. Closer this time. The soft pad of footsteps that didn't quite sound human. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps as she pushed away from the tree and stumbled forward, branches catching her long auburn hair. She'd read about the wildlife in these Oregon forests: black bears, mountain lions, and wolves. Wolves that had been reintroduced to the ecosystem and were thriving in packs throughout the Cascade Range. The beam of her flashlight caught a pair of eyes reflecting back at her from about 30 feet away. Amber eyes, wild eyes, and they were watching her with an intelligence that sent ice through her veins. Emma's scream caught in her throat as the creature stepped into a light. It was massive, easily the largest wolf she'd ever seen, even in documentaries. Its coat was midnight black with silver markings that seemed to shimmer in the artificial light. But it was the way it looked at her that truly terrified her. Not like a predator sizing up a prey, but like something far more complex was happening behind those golden eyes. The wolf took another step forward, and Emma stumbled backward, her hiking boots slipping on the damp forest floor. She hit the ground hard, her phone flying from her hands and landing several feet away, its light now pointing uselessly at the canopy above. In the sudden near darkness, she could hear the wolf moving closer. Its breathing was deep and controlled, not the panting of an animal preparing to attack. But Emma's rational mind had long since abandoned her. All she could think about were the stories she'd heard about wolf attacks, about people who went into the wilderness and never came back. "Please," she whispered into the darkness, not sure if she was talking to the wolf or to whatever gods might be listening. "I just want to go home." The wolf stopped moving. In the faint glow from her abandoned phone, Emma could just make out its silhouette. It sat down, like some enormous dog waiting for a command. The gesture was so unexpectedly domestic that Emma's terror shifted into confusion. She reached slowly for her phone, keeping her eyes on the wolf. It didn't move, didn't growl, didn't show any signs of aggression. When her fingers finally closed around the device, she pointed it back toward the animal. What she saw made her question her own sanity. The wolf was beautiful in a way that seemed almost supernatural. Its fur was pristine, without the scars or rough patches she'd expect from a wild animal. But it was the expression in its eyes that truly unsettled her. There was something almost human about the way it tilted its head, the way it seemed to be studying her with what looked like concern rather than hunger. "You're not going to hurt me, are you?" she asked softly, feeling foolish for talking to a wild animal, but somehow compelled to fill the silence. The wolf's ears perked up at the sound of her voice, and it took a single step closer. Emma tensed, but the animal stopped immediately, as if it could sense her fear and was trying not to add to it. For several long minutes, they remained frozen in this strange standoff, the lost woman and the mysterious wolf, each trying to understand the other in the heart of the Oregon wilderness. Emma's mind raced through everything she knew about animal behavior, which wasn't much, but nothing explained why this predator was acting more like a guardian than a threat. The wolf suddenly stood and began walking in a wide circle around her, always staying the same distance away. Emma tracked its movement with her flashlight, her heart rate gradually slowing as she realized the animal wasn't positioning itself to attack. Instead, it seemed to be surveying the area around them, its nose lifted to the wind as if searching for something. When it completed its circle, the wolf looked directly at her again, and then began walking in a specific direction, pausing after a few steps to look back at her expectantly. "You want me to follow you?" Emma asked, incredulously. This was insane. Following a wild wolf deeper into the forest went against every survival instinct she possessed. But as she looked around at the endless darkness surrounding her, she realized she might not have much choice. Her phone battery was dying, she had no food or water, and the temperature was dropping as the night wore on. The wolf took a few more steps and looked back again, its message clear. Emma struggled to her feet, her legs shaky from adrenaline and exhaustion. "This is crazy," she muttered, but she began following the animal anyway, unfollowing a wolf through the forest like some kind of fairy tale character. "My therapist is going to have a field day with this." As they walked, Emma noticed that the wolf seemed to know exactly where it was going. It moved with purpose, occasionally pausing to ensure she was still behind it, but never showing any uncertainty about the direction. The terrain began to change, becoming less dense and more navigable. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, Emma began to smell something that made her heart leap with hope: wood smoke. The wolf had led her to some kind of civilization. They emerged into a small clearing where a rustic cabin sat, nestled among the trees. Warm light glowed from the windows, and smoke rose from a stone chimney. It looked like something from a storybook, the kind of place where a woodsman might live, far from the modern world. The wolf stopped at the edge of the clearing and sat down again, watching as Emma stared at the cabin in amazement. "You brought me here," she said, looking down at the animal. "But how did you know?" Before the wolf could provide any answers, not that she expected any, the cabin door opened and a man stepped onto the porch. Even in the dim light, Emma could see he was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and features she couldn't quite make out from this distance. "Emma," he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the clearing. "Emma Martinez." Emma's blood turned to ice. How could this stranger possibly know her name? If this moment sent chills down your spine, I want to hear from you. Tell me from which corner of the world you're experiencing Emma's terror right now. Your connection to this story means everything. The man stepped down from the porch and began walking toward her with confident strides. As he got closer, Emma could see he was probably in his early 30s, with the kind of rugged handsomeness that belonged on the cover of an outdoor magazine. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and his clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt, looked like they'd seen plenty of wilderness adventures. But it was his eyes that made Emma's breath catch in her throat. They were the same amber gold she'd been staring into for the past hour. "Don't be afraid," he said, his voice gentle but carrying an undertone of authority that seemed to resonate in her bones. "I know this must be confusing." Emma looked down at where the wolf had been sitting. The space was empty. She spun around, her flashlight beam sweeping the area, but there was no sign of the animal anywhere. "Where did it go?" she asked, her voice high with panic and confusion. The man was close enough now that she could see the concern in his expression, the way his jaw tightened as if he was struggling with some internal decision. "The wolf," he said carefully, "brought you to safety. That's all that matters right now. But how do you know my name? How did you know I was out there?" Emma backed away from him, every instinct screaming that something was very wrong with this entire situation. He held up his hands in a peaceful gesture, stopping his advance. "I know this is overwhelming. I know you have questions. But right now, you're hypothermic, dehydrated, and exhausted. Let me help you get warm and fed, and then I'll explain everything." Emma wanted to run, but where could she go? She was still lost in the middle of nowhere. Her phone was nearly dead, and this strange man was the only human contact she'd had in hours. Plus, despite her fear, something about him felt familiar in a way she couldn't explain. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled then, and something in that expression made her knees weak. It was warm and sad and infinitely gentle, like someone who carried the weight of secrets but wished he didn't have to. "My name is Marcus," he said, "Marcus Blackwood, and I've been waiting for you to find your way here for a very long time." As the implications of his words sank in, Emma realized that getting lost in the forest might have been the beginning of something far more extraordinary than she could have ever imagined. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as lost as she thought. Emma stood frozen in the clearing, her mind struggling to process Marcus's words, waiting for her to find her way here. How could that possibly make sense when she'd never been to this part of Oregon before? When she'd only ended up here because of a wrong turn on what was supposed to be a simple day hike? "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely steady. "This is insane. I need to call someone. I need to get back to Portland." "Your phone won't work out here," Marcus interrupted gently. "The nearest cell tower is 40 miles away, but I have a landline in the cabin. You can call whoever you need to once you've warmed up." He gestured toward the cabin, and Emma noticed how the warm light from the windows seemed to beckon to her. Her body was starting to register just how cold she was, how her fingers were going numb despite the mild October weather. The adrenaline that had kept her going was finally wearing off, leaving her feeling hollow and shaky. "How do you know my name?" she asked again, not moving toward the cabin despite her body's desperate need for warmth. Marcus ran a hand through his dark hair, and Emma caught sight of what looked like old scars on his knuckles. "That's complicated. Please, Emma, let me at least get you inside before you go into shock. I promise I'll answer your questions. But not if you collapse from hypothermia first." Something in his tone convinced her. Maybe it was the genuine concern in his amber eyes, or maybe it was simply that she had no other options. Either way, she found herself nodding and following him toward the cabin. The moment she stepped inside, Emma felt like she'd entered another world. The cabin was larger than it had appeared from outside, with high ceilings supported by thick wooden beams. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, crackling with a fire that immediately began to thaw the ice in her veins. The furniture was rustic but comfortable looking, and everything seemed to have been crafted by hand with extraordinary attention to detail. But it was the photographs covering the mantelpiece that made Emma's breath catch in her throat. She moved closer, her eyes scanning the collection of images. They were old, some looked like they dated back decades, and they all seemed to feature the same family. A man who looked remarkably like Marcus, a beautiful woman with long dark hair, and in the newer photos, a young boy who grew up over the course of the images until he became unmistakably Marcus himself. "Your family?" she asked, turning to find Marcus watching her with an unreadable expression. "Yes," he said simply. "Several generations of Blackwoods have lived in this forest." Emma studied the photos more carefully. There was something strange about them, something that made her feel uneasy, though she couldn't put her finger on what it was. The people in the images all had the same striking eyes, the same confident posture, the same sense of wildness, perhaps, as if they belonged more to the forest than to civilization. "Here," Marcus said, appearing beside her with a thick wool blanket. "Sit by the fire. I'll make you some tea." As Emma settled into a large leather chair positioned perfectly to take advantage of the fire's warmth, she watched Marcus move around a small kitchen area with fluid efficiency. Everything about him seemed graceful, controlled, like he was completely comfortable in his own skin in a way most people never achieved. "So," she said, when he handed her a steaming mug of something that smelled like herbs and honey, "are you going to tell me how you knew I was out there? How you knew my name?" Marcus sat down in the chair across from her, his own mug cradled between his hands. For a long moment, he just stared into the fire, and Emma had the impression he was gathering courage for something. "What do you remember about tonight?" he asked finally. "About how you got lost?" Emma frowned. "I was hiking the Salmon River Trail. I've done it a dozen times, but today I must have missed a marker or taken a wrong turn. By the time I realized I was off the path, it was getting dark and I couldn't find my way back. And then I wandered around in the dark for hours until..." She trailed off, remembering the wolf. The massive, beautiful wolf that had led her straight to this cabin. "Until that wolf found me." Marcus nodded slowly. "Tell me about the wolf." It was huge, black with silver markings, and its eyes, ... bold quotes. Emma shivered, and not from cold. It had the most incredible amber eyes, almost like... She stopped, staring at Marcus, her tea growing cold in her hands. "Like mine," Marcus finished quietly. Emma's heart began to pound. "That's impossible, is it?" Marcus leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Think about it, Emma. Really think. How did that wolf know exactly where to bring you? How did it know you needed help? And why didn't it hurt you when it had every opportunity? Because, double quotes." Emma struggled to find a rational explanation, but her mind kept circling back to the same impossible conclusion. "You're saying that wolf was... double quotes me?" Marcus confirmed. "I was the wolf you followed through the forest." Emma shot to her feet, the blanket falling to the floor. "That's insane. People can't turn into animals. This is real life, not some fantasy novel." Marcus stood as well, his movements fluid and predatory in a way that made Emma suddenly very aware of how alone they were. "I know how it sounds. I know it goes against everything you've been taught to believe. But deep down, you know I'm telling the truth. You felt it when you looked into that wolf's eyes, didn't you? You recognized something." Emma backed toward the door, her rational mind screaming at her to run, even as another part of her whispered that everything Marcus was saying made a terrible kind of sense. "This is crazy. I need to leave. I need to get back to civilization." "Emma, wait." Marcus held up his hands again, but this time the gesture seemed less like a peaceful offering and more like a predator trying not to spook its prey. "I know this is a lot to process, but you're safe here. I would never hurt you. How can you say that?" Emma's voice was rising toward hysteria. "You're claiming to be some kind of... what, werewolf, and I'm supposed to just trust you?" Not werewolf, Marcus corrected gently. Shapeshifter. My family has carried this ability for generations. We're guardians of this forest, protectors of the balance between the human world and the wild. Tell me, from whatever city you're watching this unfold, have you ever felt like the impossible might actually be possible? Because Emma's world is about to change forever. Emma reached for the door handle, but Marcus's voice stopped her. Your grandmother knew. She spun around to face him. What? Elena Martinez, your mother's mother. She used to come hiking in these woods when she was young, back in the 1960s. She met my grandfather, Thomas Blackwood. Marcus moved slowly toward the mantelpiece and picked up one of the older photographs. This is them. With trembling hands, Emma took the photograph. It showed a young man who looked remarkably like Marcus standing beside a beautiful woman with familiar dark eyes and a warm smile. A woman who looked exactly like Emma's grandmother had in the few photos she'd seen from Elena's youth. That's impossible, Emma whispered, but the evidence was right there in her hands. Your grandmother was special, Marcus continued. She had a gift for seeing beyond the ordinary world. She knew what my grandfather was, and she accepted it. And they fell in love. Emma sank back into the chair, still clutching the photograph. My grandmother never mentioned anything about this. She talked about hiking in Oregon when she was young, but she never said anything about meeting anyone. She promised to keep our secret. It was dangerous for both families if the truth got out. But before she left Oregon to marry your grandfather and start her life in California, she made Thomas promise something. Marcus knelt beside Emma's chair, his voice gentle but urgent. She made him promise that if her family ever needed help, if any of her descendants ever found themselves lost in these woods, we would be there. That's why you knew my name, Emma said. The pieces beginning to fall into place, despite how impossible it all seemed. I've been watching over you since you first started hiking in this area 3 years ago, Marcus admitted. At first, it was just honoring my grandfather's promise, but then then what? Marcus looked into her eyes, and Emma saw something there that made her heart skip a beat. Something that looked like longing, like recognition, like coming home. Then I realized that maybe your grandmother's promise worked both ways, he said softly. Maybe you weren't just meant to find safety in these woods. Maybe you were meant to find something else entirely. As Emma stared into those amber eyes, she felt something shifting inside her, like a piece of herself she didn't know was missing, suddenly clicking into place. The rational part of her mind was still screaming that this was all impossible, that she should run and never look back. But another part, a deeper part, that felt ancient and wise, whispered that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Show me, she said quietly. Marcus blinked in surprise. What? If you really are what you say you are, show me. Prove it. For a moment, Marcus looked uncertain, almost vulnerable. Emma, the transformation can be frightening to witness. I don't want to scare you more than I already have. I'm already terrified, Emma admitted, but I need to know. I need to see the truth. Marcus studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. If that's what you need. As he began to step back from her chair, Emma had no idea that she was about to witness something that would change not just her understanding of the world, but her understanding of herself and the destiny that had been waiting for her in these ancient woods. Marcus stood in the center of the cabin's main room, his hands steady at his sides, despite the tension Emma could see in every line of his body. The firelight cast dancing shadows across his face, making him look both more human and somehow wilder than before. Are you sure about this? He asked one final time, his amber eyes searching her face for any sign of doubt. Emma gripped the arms of the leather chair, her knuckles white with tension. I need to see. I need to know this is real and not some elaborate hallucination brought on by hypothermia and fear. Marcus nodded slowly, then began removing his flannel shirt. Emma's breath caught as she saw his torso, not just because of the obvious strength in his shoulders and chest, but because of the intricate tattoos that covered his skin. They weren't ordinary tattoos. They looked like ancient symbols, like tribal markings that seemed to shift and move in the firelight. These are pack marks, Marcus explained, noticing her stare. Each one represents a milestone, a responsibility, a connection to the family line. They help anchor us during the change. The change, Emma repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Don't be afraid. Remember, you've already met this part of me. You trusted him enough to follow him through the forest. What happened next would stay burned in Emma's memory for the rest of her life. Marcus's body began to shimmer like heat waves rising from summer pavement. The change started at his hands, his fingers lengthening, his nails extending into claws. But it wasn't the violent, painful transformation she'd seen in movies. This was fluid, natural, like watching a master artist reshape clay. His face began to elongate, his features becoming more angular. His hair seemed to flow and multiply, becoming the thick black fur she remembered from the forest. His entire body was growing, muscles expanding and reshaping themselves with a grace that was almost beautiful to watch. Within moments, the man was gone, and in his place stood the magnificent wolf that had saved her life. Emma found herself holding her breath, not from fear but from sheer awe. Seeing the transformation had somehow made it less frightening and more miraculous. This wasn't some monster from a horror story. This was Marcus, just in a different form. The wolf, Marcus, approached her slowly, his amber eyes holding the same gentle intelligence she'd seen in his human form. When he reached her chair, he lowered his massive head and rested it on her knee, looking up at her with an expression that seemed to ask for acceptance. With trembling fingers, Emma reached out and touched the soft fur between his ears. It was even silkier than it had appeared in the forest, and she could feel the warmth of his skin beneath. At her touch, a low rumble of contentment came from his throat, and Emma realized he was purring like some enormous wild cat. "You're beautiful," she whispered, and the wolf's ears perked up at the sound of her voice. "Both versions of you." The shimmer came again, and within moments, Marcus was kneeling beside her chair in human form once more, his clothes somehow restored, though Emma couldn't begin to guess how that worked. "Thank you," he said softly, "for not running, for trying to understand." Emma was quiet for a long time, her hand still resting where his fur had been moments before, now touching his shoulder. "The tattoos," she said finally. "They're gone." Marcus looked down at his chest and arms, now unmarked by anything except old scars. "They only appear when I'm in transition or when the pack calls. They're not really tattoos in the traditional sense. They're more like spiritual markers." "Pack?" Emma asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "There are others like me. Not many, and not all in this immediate area, but we're connected. Family, mostly, though sometimes the gift appears in other bloodlines." Marcus stood and moved to stoke the fire, giving Emma space to process what she'd witnessed. "We have responsibilities to each other and to the land." Emma curled up in the chair, pulling the blanket around herself like armor. "How long have you known that you could do this?" "Since I was 13. That's when the change first manifests, usually around puberty. My father taught me to control it, to understand what it means to carry this gift." Marcus's voice carried a note of sadness. "He died when I was 20. A hunting accident, though it wasn't really an accident." "What do you mean?" Marcus returned to his chair, his expression growing dark. "There are people who know about us. Not many, but enough. Some are scientists who want to study us, capture us, experiment on us. Others are hunters who see us as the ultimate trophy. My father was betrayed by someone he trusted. Someone who led hunters straight to him during a full moon when he was most vulnerable. Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October night. That's horrible. It's why we're so careful about whom we trust with our secret. Why we live so far from civilization, and why we don't often form connections with ... double quotes. Marcus paused, looking at her meaningfully. With ordinary humans, but your grandfather and my grandmother were an exception. And it didn't end well for them either. Marcus leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. They wanted to be together, but the risks were too great. Elena chose to leave, to marry someone from her own world and have a safe, normal life. Thomas spent the rest of his years alone, waiting for her to come back, knowing she never would. Emma felt tears prick at her eyes, though she wasn't sure if they were for her grandmother's lost love or for the pain she could see in Marcus's face as he told the story. Is that why you've been watching me? Because of some old promise? At first, yes. Marcus met her gaze, and Emma saw something vulnerable in his expression, but not anymore. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. Emma could feel her heart beating faster, and she wondered if Marcus could hear it with his enhanced senses. What changed? She asked, though part of her was afraid to know the answer. You did. Marcus stood and began pacing, running his hands through his hair in apparent frustration. 3 years ago, when you first started hiking these trails, I was just doing my duty, keeping an eye on Elena's granddaughter, making sure you stayed safe. But then I started paying attention to who you were, not just whose blood you carried. He stopped pacing and looked at her directly. You have your grandmother's gift, Emma. You see things other people miss. You notice the small details, the patterns in nature, the way animals behave. You respect the forest instead of just using it. And you have this light inside you that draws people in. Marcus, ... double quotes. Emma started, but he held up a hand. I know how this sounds. I know how impossible this whole situation is. A shapeshifter falling for a human woman, repeating the same mistake that broke my grandfather's heart. But I can't help how I feel. If you're feeling the electricity between these two like I am, comment and tell me what country you're experiencing this magical moment from, because what happens next will change everything. Emma stood up slowly, the blanket falling away from her shoulders. Marcus's confession had awakened something in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire and everything to do with the way he was looking at her. What if it's not a mistake? She asked quietly. Marcus went very still. What do you mean? What if my grandmother didn't leave because she was afraid? What if she left because she knew something we don't? Emma moved closer to him, drawn by an instinct she couldn't name. What if she knew that someday her granddaughter would come back to finish what they started? Emma, you don't understand what you're saying. Being with someone like me, it would change your entire life. You'd have to give up your normal world, your career, your friends. You'd have to live with constant secrecy and danger. Maybe my normal world was never where I belonged anyway, Emma replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Maybe that's why I've always felt like something was missing, why I've never been able to settle down with anyone, why I keep coming back to these woods, even when I have no logical reason to. Marcus stared at her, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. You would give up everything for someone you just met, for something you don't fully understand. Emma reached out and took his hands in hers, noting how perfectly they fit together, how right it felt to touch him. I wouldn't be giving up everything. I'd be gaining something I didn't even know I was searching for. For a moment, they stood there in the firelight, hands clasped, looking into each other's eyes while the weight of possibility hung between them. Emma could see the war being fought in Marcus's expression, hope battling against caution, desire fighting with responsibility. "There's something else you need to know," Marcus said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "Something about why your grandmother really left." Emma's heart skipped. "What?" "She was pregnant when she left Oregon. With your mother." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She staggered backward, her hands flying to her mouth. "That's impossible. My grandfather was my mother's father. I've seen the birth certificates, the family photos. Your grandmother was very clever," Marcus said gently. "She timed her departure perfectly, married quickly, and never told anyone the truth. But Emma, there's a reason you feel so connected to these woods, so comfortable with what I am. There's a reason you weren't afraid when that wolf approached you in the forest." Emma sank back into the chair, her mind reeling. "You're saying that I have ... double quotes, shapeshifter blood. Yes, it's diluted. You're only 1/4, but it's there. It's why you have the sight. Why you can sense things others can't. And it's why ... Marcus knelt beside her chair again, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "It's why I knew from the moment I first saw you that you were meant to be mine." As the truth of her heritage began to sink in, Emma realized that everything in her life had been leading to this moment, to this cabin, to this man who carried the wild in his blood just as she apparently did. The world she'd thought she knew was dissolving around her, being replaced by something far more dangerous and infinitely more magical. And for the first time in her 28 years, Emma Martinez felt like she was finally coming home. Emma sat in stunned silence, her mind racing to process everything Marcus had just revealed. The fire crackled in the hearth, filling the quiet cabin with warm light. But she felt as though she was floating in some surreal dream where nothing made sense and everything made perfect sense at the same time. 1/4 shapeshifter, she whispered, testing the words on her tongue. They felt foreign and familiar simultaneously, like speaking a language she'd forgotten she knew. "That's why I have always felt different, why I've never quite fit in anywhere." Marcus nodded, his amber eyes never leaving her face. "The blood calls to the blood, Emma. Even diluted, it recognizes its own kind. That's why you were drawn to these woods, where you kept coming back, even when you had no logical reason to." Emma stood abruptly and began pacing the small space, her movements restless and agitated. "This is insane. Yesterday I was a marketing coordinator who lived in a studio apartment and worried about whether I'd remembered to pay my electric bill. Today I am apparently descended from shapeshifters and destined to be with a man who turns into a wolf. I know it's overwhelming. Overwhelming." Emma spun to face him, her voice rising. "Marcus, you're talking about my entire identity, my entire understanding of who I am and where I come from. You're telling me that my grandmother lived a lie her whole life, that my mother never knew the truth about her own father, that I have been walking around with supernatural blood in my veins and never had a clue." Marcus rose slowly, his movements careful and controlled. "I understand your anger. I understand your confusion. But Emma, this doesn't change who you are at your core. It just explains why you've always been exceptional." "Exceptional?" Emma laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "I work in marketing, Marcus. I create ad campaigns for dental offices and small businesses. I've never done anything exceptional in my life." "You're wrong." Marcus moved closer, his voice intense. "You have instincts that save lives. You read people in situations with an accuracy that goes beyond normal intuition. You have a connection to nature that most humans have lost. and you have a capacity for loyalty and love that ... double quotes. He paused, running a hand through his hair. That made me fall for you before I ever spoke to you. Emma felt her anger deflating, replaced by something warmer and more complicated. You've been watching me for 3 years. That should terrify me. It should, Marcus agreed. But it doesn't, does it? Emma considered this, exploring her feelings like probing a sore tooth. She should be horrified by the idea of being stalked, even by someone with good intentions. But instead, she felt ... protected, cherished even. No, she admitted quietly. It doesn't. And that probably says something about my mental state. It says something about your instincts, Marcus corrected. Deep down, you've always known you weren't alone in these woods. You've felt me watching, and instead of being afraid, you felt safer. Emma moved to the window and looked out at the dark forest beyond. Show me something, she said suddenly. What do you mean? If I really have shapeshifter blood, if this is all true, then there should be something I can do, shouldn't there? Some ability I should have. Marcus joined her at the window, his shoulder brushing against hers. The abilities manifest differently in mixed bloodlines. You might never be able to fully shift, but there would be other signs. Enhanced senses, faster healing, and ability to communicate with animals. ... Balks. Communicate with animals. Emma turned to stare at him. That's not possible, isn't it? Marcus gestured toward the window. Look outside, Emma. Really look. Don't use your eyes alone. Use everything. Emma pressed her face closer to the glass, staring out into the darkness. At first, she saw nothing but trees and shadows. But then, gradually, she began to notice things she'd missed before. The way the moonlight seemed to create a path through the forest. The subtle movement in the underbrush that suggested life, even in the deep of night. And something else ... There's something out there, she whispered. What do you see? I don't see it exactly. I feel it. Something watching us. Emma's voice grew more confident as the sensation strengthened. Multiple somethings. They're curious but not threatening. They're waiting for something. Marcus smiled, and Emma caught a glimpse of something wild and proud in his expression. So to them, what? How? Don't think about it. Just feel what you want to say and let it out. Emma felt foolish, but she closed her eyes and tried to focus on the presence she'd sensed in the forest. Without fully understanding what she was doing, she found herself making a soft, low sound, not quite human, not quite animal. The response was immediate. A chorus of howls rose from the darkness, harmonious and welcoming. Emma's eyes flew open in shock. The pack, Marcus explained softly. They're welcoming you home. From wherever you're watching this unfold, New York, London, São Paulo, Tokyo, tell me, have you ever felt like you belonged somewhere before you even knew why? Because Emma is about to discover that coming home sometimes means leaving everything you thought you knew behind. Tears began streaming down Emma's face, though she couldn't say if they were from joy or grief or simple, overwhelming emotion. They know me. They've been waiting for you as long as I have, Marcus said. Not just because of the promise made to your grandmother, but because you're family. Blood calls to blood, pack calls to pack. Emma wiped her eyes and turned to face Marcus fully. What happens now? If I accept this, if I choose to stay, what does that mean for my life? Marcus's expression grew serious. It means leaving your old life behind. You couldn't go back to Portland, couldn't maintain your apartment or your job. It would be too dangerous, and the pull of this place would be too strong to ignore now that you know the truth. And if I choose to leave, if I decide this is all too much. Pain flashed across Marcus's features, but his voice remained steady. Then I'll escort you back to civilization myself, and we'll make sure your memories of the supernatural elements are ... clouded. You'll remember getting lost. Remember finding help at a cabin, but the details will be fuzzy. You'll be safe. You can do that. Manipulate memories. It's not manipulation exactly. More like allowing the human mind to rationalize what it can't accept. Most people do it naturally when confronted with the impossible. Emma walked back to the fireplace, staring into the flames as she weighed her options. Everything logical told her to choose the memory alteration, to go back to her safe, predictable life and pretend none of this had ever happened. But another part of her, a part that felt more real than anything she'd ever experienced, was screaming at her to stay. "Can I ask you something?" she said without turning round. "Anything. When you watch me hiking, when you see me in the forest, what do you see? Really see?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I see someone who moves through the wilderness like she was born to it. Someone who notices the deer path that leads to fresh water, who instinctively knows which plants are safe to touch and which ones aren't. I see someone who talks to the trees like old friends and who somehow always knows the way home, even when she's never been somewhere before." Emma smiled, despite her emotional turmoil. "I do talk to the trees, I know. I've heard you." She turned to face him again. "What else?" "I see someone who's been sleepwalking through life, going through the motions of being normal, when normal was never what she was meant to be. I see someone who's been waiting her whole life for permission to be extraordinary." The words hit Emma like a physical blow, because they were so accurate it hurt. She had been sleepwalking, had been settling for a life that felt too small for the restlessness inside her. "If I stay," she said slowly, "if I choose this life, what would I be choosing exactly?" Marcus moved closer, his eyes intense. "You'd be choosing to live authentically for the first time in your life. You'd be choosing a connection to the natural world that most people never experience. You'd be choosing a family that would protect you with their lives. And you?" Emma asked quietly. "What would I be choosing with you?" Marcus stopped just inches from her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You'd be choosing a mate who would love you with every cell in his body for the rest of his very long life. You'd be choosing someone who sees every beautiful, wild, extraordinary thing about you and wants to spend eternity encouraging it to grow." Emma's breath caught in her throat. "How long is very long? Shapeshifters live for centuries, Emma, and with shapeshifter blood in your veins, even diluted, you'd share that longevity." The implications of that statement sent Emma's mind reeling again. Not just a new life, but a long life. Not just love, but love that could last for hundreds of years. "This is crazy," she whispered. "Yes," Marcus agreed. "Completely crazy. I barely know you." "You know me better than anyone ever has," Marcus replied softly. "You've been watching me just as much as I've been watching you, Emma. Every time you've hiked these trails, every time you've felt that sense of not being alone, you've been getting to know me. Your soul recognized mine long before your mind caught up." Emma knew he was right. Standing here in this cabin, looking into his amber eyes, felt more like coming home than her apartment in Portland ever had. This man, this impossible, magical man, felt more familiar than people she'd known her entire life. "If I say yes," she said, "if I choose this, there's no going back." "No going back," Marcus confirmed. "But Emma, if you say yes, you won't want to go back. This life, this love, this connection to something greater than yourself, once you experience it fully, your old life will feel like a black and white photograph compared to living in full color." As Emma stared into Marcus's eyes, feeling the pull of destiny and desire warring with a lifetime of caution, she realized she was standing at the most important crossroads of her life. And somewhere deep in her bones, in the blood that connected her to her grandmother and to the wild legacy she'd never known she carried, she could feel the answer rising up like the moon over the forest. Emma closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders like a mantle. When she opened them again, Marcus was watching her with an expression of hope and terror that mirrored her own emotions perfectly. "I choose you," she said quietly. "I choose this life. I choose to stop running from who I really am." The smile that spread across Marcus's face was radiant, transforming his features from handsome to absolutely breathtaking. He reached for her hands, and the moment their skin touched, Emma felt something shift inside her, like a door opening, like coming alive for the first time. "Emma," Marcus breathed, his voice rough with emotion. "Are you sure?" Instead of answering with words, Emma rose on her tiptoes and kissed him. The moment their lips met, it was as if every piece of her had been scattered and lost, suddenly clicked into place. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, but then Marcus's arms came round her and she melted into him, feeling safer and more complete than she ever had in her life. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Emma could see gold flecks dancing in Marcus's amber eyes. "The pack bond," he explained softly, touching her face with gentle fingers. "It's beginning to form. You'll start to feel different, stronger. Your senses will become more acute, your healing will accelerate, and you'll be able to sense the other pack members even when they're miles away." As if his words had triggered something, Emma suddenly became aware of presences in the forest around them. Not threatening, but watchful, protective. "They're still out there," she said, turning toward the window. "They're waiting to meet you properly, to welcome you into the family." Marcus's hands settled on her waist, warm and reassuring. "But first, there's something I need to tell you. Something about the dangers we'll face." Emma felt a chill of foreboding. "What kind of dangers?" Marcus guided her back to the chairs by the fire, his expression growing serious. "I told you earlier about the people who hunt our kind. Scientists, trophy hunters, government agencies that want to study us or exploit us. The problem is, they're getting better at finding us. How? Technology, mostly. Satellite imagery that can track unusual wildlife patterns. Genetic testing that can identify shapeshifter DNA in blood samples. And they have human collaborators, people who know what to look for and how to set traps." Emma felt ice forming in her stomach. "Are we in danger right now?" "Not immediately, but Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Emma was beginning to recognize as a sign of his stress. "There have been signs lately. Hikers who aren't really hikers, asking too many questions about local wildlife. Unusual aircraft flying over the forest. And 3 weeks ago, we found surveillance equipment hidden near one of our territory markers." "Oh God," Emma whispered. "Marcus, if they're already suspicious, me disappearing right now is going to make things worse. People will come looking for me. My job will report me missing when I don't show up Monday. My landlord will wonder why I haven't paid rent." Marcus nodded grimly. "We've thought of that. Tomorrow, you'll need to drive back to Portland and tie up loose ends. Quit your job, break your lease, pack what you want to keep. You'll tell people you've decided to take a break from city life. Maybe try living off-grid for a while. It's not uncommon for people your age to make dramatic life changes, and then you disappear completely, as far as the world is concerned. Emma Martinez will simply vanish into the wilderness like so many others have before." The reality of what she was agreeing to hit Emma like a cold wave. "I'll never see my friends again. My co-workers. I'll never be able to contact them or let them know I'm okay." "Emma," Marcus said gently, "I need you to understand something. This isn't just about changing your address or your lifestyle. This is about leaving humanity behind. Once you're fully bonded to the pack, once your shapeshifter abilities fully manifest, You won't be human anymore. You'll be something else, something that has to stay hidden from the world." Emma stared into the fire, watching the flames dance as she processed the enormity of what she was giving up. Her job, her apartment, her friends, everything that had made up her identity was about to disappear. "I know it's a lot," Marcus continued. "I know it's frightening. If you want to change your mind, no," Emma said firmly. "I meant what I said. I choose this. I choose you. It's just ... It's bigger than I realized." Marcus moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I'll spend every day for the rest of our very long lives making sure you never regret this choice." The sincerity in his voice made Emma's heart flutter. "How do you know we're compatible long term? How do you know this feeling between us isn't just some kind of supernatural attraction that will fade?" "Because I've had 3 years to fall in love with who you are. Not just what you are," Marcus replied. "I've watched you help injured animals you found on the trail. I've seen you leave extra food for the ravens who follow you on your hikes. I've watched you sit for hours by the stream, just listening to the water, finding peace in simple moments. I fell in love with your kindness, your curiosity, your strength, your gentleness with living things." Emma felt tears prick her eyes again. "You really have been watching me for 3 years, every hike, every visit to these woods. I told myself it was duty, but it became something else very quickly." Marcus brought her hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles. "I love the way you talk to yourself when you think no one is listening. I love how you always pack extra water and snacks, just in case you meet someone on the trail who needs them. I love that you've never once littered or damaged anything in these woods, even when you thought no one would know." Marcus ... double quotes, Emma starred in, but he continued, "I love your laugh. I love how excited you get when you spot wildlife. I love that you're brave enough to hike alone, but smart enough to stay on marked trails. I love that you're here, right now, choosing something terrifying because it feels right in your soul. If you've ever felt love this deep, this certain, tell me from which corner of the world you're feeling it with us, because what Emma doesn't know is that their happiness is about to be tested in ways she can't imagine." Before Emma could respond, a sound cut through the night that made both of them freeze. It was a howl, but not like the welcoming calls they'd heard earlier. This was urgent, warning, filled with alarm. Marcus was on his feet instantly, his entire body tense and alert. Something's wrong. The howl came again, closer this time, and Emma could hear the distress in it, even with her newly awakening senses. "Stay here," Marcus commanded, already moving toward the door. "Like hell," Emma replied, standing up. "If we're going to be partners, we're going to be partners. I'm not sitting in this cabin while you face danger alone." Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but another howl cut through the night, and he nodded curtly. "Stay close to me. Do exactly what I say when I say it." They stepped out into the cool night air, and immediately Emma could sense the disturbance in the forest. Animals were agitated, moving restlessly. Even the insects seemed to have gone quiet. A massive grey wolf burst from the tree line, running at full speed toward the cabin. As it got closer, Emma could see blood matting its fur on one side. "David," Marcus said grimly, and Emma realized this was one of his pack members. The wolf, David, shifted as he reached them, the transformation happening so quickly Emma barely saw it. Suddenly, a man was standing before them, naked and bleeding from a wound on his shoulder, his face tight with pain and anger. "They found us," David gasped. 3 vehicles, military style. They have tranquilizer guns and nets. Sarah and Michael are still out there, but they were closing in fast. Marcus's face went deadly pale. "How many?" "At least 8 humans," maybe more. They knew exactly where to look, Marcus. This wasn't random. David's eyes found Emma, and his expression grew grim. They're asking about a woman, describing her perfectly. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. They're looking for me? It's a trap, Marcus realized, his voice hollow. They used you as bait to find us. They must have been tracking you somehow. But how? Emma asked, though even as the words left her mouth, she was pulling out her phone. The device that had been dead in the forest, that she'd assumed couldn't work out here. The device that might have been transmitting her location all along. Marcus took the phone from her hands and hurled it against the cabin wall, where it shattered into pieces. But the damage was already done. Somehow someone had used Emma to find the pack, and now they were all in mortal danger. "We have to run," David said urgently. "Now, before they surround us completely." But even as he spoke, they could hear the sound of vehicles approaching through the forest, engines growling as they navigated the rough terrain. Bright lights began cutting through the trees, and Emma realized with growing horror that they might already be too late. Marcus pulled her against his side, his arm protective around her waist. "I'm so sorry, Emma. I should have realized. I should have protected you better. This isn't your fault," Emma said fiercely, even as fear clawed at her throat. "We'll figure this out. We'll get through this." But as the lights grew brighter, and the sound of shouting voices carried through the night air, Emma wondered if she'd chosen her new life just in time to watch it be destroyed before it could truly begin. The hunt was closing in, and Emma was about to discover that loving a shapeshifter meant sharing not just his magic, but also his enemies. The hunter's lights cut through the forest like deadly stars, growing brighter with each passing second. Emma could hear the mechanical whir of drones overhead and the distant barking of dogs, tracker dogs, that would make escape nearly impossible. "The cave system," David said urgently, pressing his hand against his wounded shoulder. "We can lose them in the tunnels beneath the Eagle's Peak." Marcus shook his head. "Too far. They'll have us surrounded before we make it halfway there." His amber eyes swept the forest, calculating distances and possibilities with supernatural precision. "We need another option." Emma felt something stirring in her chest, a warmth that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. The pack bond Marcus had mentioned was strengthening, and with it came an awareness she'd never experienced before. She could sense the other shapeshifters in the forest, Sarah and Michael, still running but wounded and exhausted. She could feel their fear, their desperation, their determination to survive. "How many of our people are out there?" she asked. "6 total," Marcus replied. "David, Sarah, Michael, Thomas and Elena, my cousins and us, against at least 8 humans with military equipment," David added grimly. "The odds aren't good." Emma closed her eyes and reached out with her newly awakened senses, feeling for the hunters closing in around them. What she discovered made her blood run cold. "Marcus, they're not just hunting randomly. They know exactly where each of your pack members is. They're tracking you individually somehow." Marcus's face went deadly pale. "That's impossible. We're too careful. Unless someone gave them information about your patterns, your territories, your safe houses." Emma interrupted, the pieces clicking together in her mind. "Someone who's been watching your pack for a long time." The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder, and Emma could now make out voices calling to each other through the darkness. Professional voices, coordinated and confident. "There," David pointed through the trees. "Military-style Humvees. They are setting up a perimeter." Emma felt the warmth in her chest grow stronger, spreading through her limbs like liquid fire. "Marcus, what did you say about my abilities? About shapeshifter blood, calling to shapeshifter blood?" "Emma, now isn't the time. "It is exactly the time," she said fiercely, grabbing his hands. "You said the blood recognizes its own kind. What if it can do more than that? What if it can amplify things?" Marcus stared at her, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. "You want to try to boost the pack's abilities? I don't know if I can, but I have to try." Emma looked between Marcus and David. "Tell me how the pack bond works. Tell me how to strengthen it." David looked skeptical. "She's not even fully shifted yet. She can't possibly Eleanor's granddaughter," Marcus cut him off. "And Elena could do things we still don't understand." He turned to Emma, his expression intense. "The pack bond connects us through shared energy, shared strength. In times of crises, the Alpha can draw on that collective power to enhance everyone's abilities. You're the Alpha." "I am." Marcus's eyes began to glow with golden light. "But I've never tried to include someone who isn't fully shapeshifter. It could be dangerous." Emma could hear the hunters getting closer, their voices more distinct now. They had minutes and most before they were discovered. "Everything about this is dangerous," she replied. "Do it." Marcus placed his hands on either side of her face, his palms warm against her skin. "Focus on the connection you feel to the pack. Let it grow stronger. Don't fight the power when it comes. Let it flow through you." Emma nodded and closed her eyes, reaching out with everything she had toward the sensations she'd been experiencing since the bond began forming. At first, there was just the awareness of the other pack members scattered through the forest. But then, something deeper stirred. Something that felt ancient and wild and infinitely powerful. The warmth in her chest exploded outward like a star going nova. Power surged through the pack bond, amplified by Emma's hybrid heritage in ways none of them had expected. Suddenly, every shapeshifter in the forest was faster, stronger, their senses enhanced beyond their normal supernatural abilities. Through the bond, Emma felt Sarah and Michael's exhaustion vanish as new strength flooded their limbs. She sensed Thomas and Elena, who had been trapped near the southern perimeter, suddenly able to break free from the hunters closing in on them. But the power surge came with a cost. Emma gasped as energy poured out of her, leaving her dizzy and weak. Marcus caught her as she swayed, his own eyes blazing with enhanced power. "Emma, are you okay?" "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice was shaky. "Go. Help your pack. I'm not leaving you. You have to." Emma pushed him toward the forest, where the sounds of conflict were growing louder. "They need their Alpha. I'll be right behind you." Marcus looked torn between his duty to his pack and his need to protect her. But the decision was made for him when gunfire erupted through the trees. Not normal bullets, but the distinctive sound of tranquilizer guns. "Garvid, stay with her," Marcus commanded, already beginning to shift. "Keep her safe." "Marcus, wait." But Emma's words were lost as he completed his transformation, becoming the magnificent black wolf she'd first encountered in the forest. He bounded into the darkness, moving with supernatural speed toward the sounds of battle. David, despite his injury, moved protectively in front of Emma. "We need to get you somewhere safer." "No," Emma said firmly, feeling strength returning to her limbs as her connection to the pack stabilized. "We need to end this. Those hunters aren't going to stop just because we escaped tonight. They'll keep coming back until they capture or kill everyone you care about." Through the pack bond, Emma could sense the battle raging through the forest. The enhanced shapeshifters were holding their own against the hunters, but it was a temporary advantage. The humans had numbers, technology, and preparation on their side. And then Emma felt something that made her blood freeze, pain, sharp and sudden, coming through the bond from Marcus. "It's hurt," she gasped, pressing her hand to her chest where the pain echoed. David's face went grim. "They got him with a tranq dart." The dosage that would knock out a normal wolf. It might kill him in his enhanced state. Emma didn't think. She ran toward the sounds of combat, David cursing as he chased after her. The pack bond guided her through the darkness, better than any flashlight could have, leading her straight to where Marcus lay, unconscious in wolf form, surrounded by 3 hunters with tranquilizer rifles. For the rest of your lives, when someone asks you where you were when you witnessed true love conquering impossible odds, tell them you were right here with Emma, because what she did next defied every law of nature and science. Something primal and furious rose up in Emma as she saw the man she loved lying helpless. The shapeshifter blood in her veins sang with rage, and for the first time in her life, she felt the pull of the change. She couldn't fully shift. Her heritage was too diluted for that. But something else happened. Her senses exploded to supernatural levels. Her strength increased tenfold. And when she opened her mouth to scream at the hunters threatening her mate, what came out was a sound no human throat should have been able to make. The howl that erupted from Emma carried all the power of her hybrid nature and her connection to the pack. It was answered immediately by every shapeshifter in the forest, creating a chorus of wild fury that sent the hunters stumbling backward in terror. In that moment of confusion, David struck. Despite his injury, he shifted and attacked the hunters with devastating efficiency. The other pack members, drawn by Emma's call, converged on their location. The battle was brief but decisive. The hunters, faced with shapeshifters moving with unprecedented speed and coordination, were quickly overwhelmed. Some fled into the forest, others were captured by the pack. Emma knelt beside Marcus's unconscious form, her hands trembling as she checked for a pulse. It was there but weak, his breathing shallow. "The tranquilizer," she said to David, who had shifted back to human form. "How do we counteract it?" "Time, usually. But with the enhanced metabolism from your power boost ... Double quotes. David frowned. "It should work through his system faster. He just needs to hold on." Emma placed her hands on Marcus's wolf form, feeling the pack bond humming between them. Without fully understanding what she was doing, she began pushing her own life force through the connection, sharing her strength with him. Marcus's eyes fluttered open, golden and confused but alive. As dawn broke over the Oregon forest, the pack gathered in the clearing around the cabin. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but everyone understood that this was just the beginning. The secret was out. The hunters would return with greater numbers and better preparation. "We have to leave," Thomas said grimly. "All of us. Find new territory, establish new identities." "Actually," Emma said, surprising everyone, "I have a better idea." She looked around at the faces of her new family, scarred, tired, but united in their determination to protect each other. "What if we stopped running? What if we took control of the narrative instead of always reacting to theirs?" Marcus, now back in human form and recovering from the tranquilizer, looked at her with curiosity. "What do you mean?" I know people in marketing, in media, in storytelling. What if instead of hiding from the world, we showed the world who you really are? Not as monsters to be hunted, but as guardians to be protected." The pack exchanged uncertain glances. "It's risky," Sarah said. "Everything is risky now," Emma replied. "But this way, we control the story. We show them the truth, that you're not the enemy. You're the protectors of places like this, the guardians of balance between civilization and the wild." Marcus smiled, and Emma saw hope flickering in his amber eyes. "It could work. If we're careful, if we choose our allies wisely. We'd be taking a huge gamble," David warned. "Yes," Emma agreed, "but we'd be taking it together, as a pack, as a family." As the sun rose fully over the ancient forest, Emma realized that her story was just beginning. She'd found her mate, her pack, her purpose, and together they were going to change the world's understanding of what it meant to be wild. The hunt was over. The real adventure was about to begin. 3 months later, the first documentary about the Oregon shapeshifter pack would premiere to critical acclaim, changing public perception and leading to the establishment of the first supernatural preserve in North America. But that's a story for another day. Today, Emma Martinez, now Emma Blackwood, was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of her alpha, surrounded by her pack, in the forest that had always been calling her home.